Welcome back everyone. So in the last video, we saw employees whose manager left the company, which was 37 question in our SQL 50 series. And in this video, we are going to solve exchange sheet. So let's dive in. Okay, so in this question, we are given a sheet table which has two columns, ID and student, where ID is the primary key. Each row of this table indicate the name and ID of the student. The ID sequence always start from 1 and increment continuously. Now we have to write a solution to swap the seat ID of every two consecutive students. If the number of the students is odd, ID of the last student is not swapped. Now we have to return the result table order by ID in ascending order. The result format is in the following example. So in the first example, we can see there are 5 students, and since the number of the students is odd, we will not swap the last student IDs because there is no companion for the student with an ID of 5. So there will be two groups, that is the group with an ID of 1 and 2, and the next group will include the student with an ID of 3 and 4. So for the first group, we will swap ID1 with the name Doris and ID2 with the name Abbott. And for the next group, we will swap ID4 with Emerson and ID3 with Green. So how should we approach this problem? So as you can see in this example table, there is a pattern that we can look into solve this problem. So the thing is that if the student ID is odd, then we have to replace its name by ID1 plus that current ID. So for the ID1, we have to replace its name by ID2. That is, Abbott is replaced with name Doris. And if the ID is even, then we have to replace the name by ID1 before it. So that is Doris is replaced with Abbott. So for example, in the next group, since the ID3 is odd, then we have to replace immersion with name of student whose ID is 1 plus then this ID. So immersion is replaced with green. And since ID4 is even, then we have to replace the name green with an ID of the student which is less than this current ID. Okay, that is immersion. And since ID5 do not have any companion, we'll keep the name of the student as it is. So let me write the solution. So we have to select something from seed table, and let's give this table a name alias of S1. Okay, now what we have to select? So as per the resulting table, we have to select the ID and the student name. Okay, we'll select S1 dot ID, and now we have to select the IDs, but we have to swap the IDs of the student in group of two. As per what I have told you, that if the ID is even, then we have to replace the name of that student with an ID just previous to that current ID. And if the ID is odd, then we have to replace the student name in the ID just ahead of it. So we will check that if that is case, when the S1 dot ID is even, then what we will do? Then we will select student from seat. Let's give this table a name of S2, where S2 dot ID is just before this ID S1 dot ID, that is S1 dot ID minus 1. So if the ID is even, then we will select a student that is just before this ID, and we'll take the student from that is student name. Okay, else, which means that the S1 dot ID is odd, and if it is odd, then we will select what? Select student from seat, and let's give this table an alias of S3, where S3 dot ID should be what? Is equal to S1 dot ID plus 1. So if the student ID is odd, then we have to select the student that is next to it. Okay, so if the student ID is odd, then we will select the student where the ID is just greater than this current ID. So S3.id should be S1.id plus 1. But there is a problem here. Now let's see this example again here. Since the ID 5 is odd, which means that we have to select a student that is just after the student, that is student with an ID of 6. So here select a student where S3.id is greater than S1.id plus 1. So S1.id here will be 5 and S1.id plus 1 is 6. So S3.id is equal to 6. So there is no entry with an student ID of 6. So what we have to do is we have to select in that case the same name. So we'll use the COALESCE operator here. That is, select either this name. If for example there is a student with an ID just greater than it, then select the name from that. Else we'll select the same name, that is same student, s1 dot student. That's it. And then we will end this case statement, that is end, and we will select this case statement as student. So let me run the query. Okay, so case when s1 dot id is even, then select student from seat s2 where s2 dot id is s1 dot id minus 1. Okay, else we'll select student from seat s3 where s3 dot id is equal to s1 dot id plus 1. Else we'll select s1 dot student. Okay, and then we will end this case statement. Okay, so the issue here is we will have to wrap the first query in the parentheses. Okay, so let me run this again. Okay, so this test case has been passed. Now we'll submit this to see if the query can pass all the test case or not. Okay, so all the test case has been passed. Now let me explain the query once again. So as per the example, we can see that there will be two groups and the last entry will remain as it is because there is no companion for the student with an ID of 5. So let's take second example. So in the second example, we can see that we have to replace green with immersion and immersion with green. Since the ID 4 is even, then we have to select a student that is just before this ID, that is 3, and we'll replace green with immersion. And for ID 3, we have to select the student that is just after it, since ID 3 is odd. Okay, so we'll replace immersion with green. That's what we are doing. So what we are doing is we'll select s1 dot, this is the s1. So from s1 we will select the ID, and then we will see that if s1 dot id is even, then we have to select a student that is just before it. Okay, and we'll select the name out of it. But if it is not even, then we know that it must be odd. And if it is odd, then we'll select a student that is just after it. But the problem here was that student after the current ID might be what? Might not exist. So we'll select the same student. This will happen only in the case where the number of entries in the seat table is odd. So if the entries are not odd, then these two will replace each other, these two will replace each other, and that's it. But since the entries are odd, then which means that an odd entry might not have an even entry after it. So we'll use the COALESCE operator where we'll select the next student's name, and if that next entry does not exist, then we'll select the same student name.